Okay, it's now 11 o'clock, so I think we will make a start. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this first part of our two-part webinar on how to use AI when localizing your digital learning content. Today's session will be focused on text localization. So that's things like your e-learning module on screen text, your quizzes, your facilitator playbooks, PowerPoint decks, and that kind of thing. Before we get started, I will kick us off with an introduction. So my name is Emily, and I am General Manager here at Comtech Translations, where I am also Head of Client Partnerships. I have got just under 9 years experience in the localization industry, and during that time, I have developed a bit of a niche within learning and development, as you can see by some of the clients that I've listed here on screen. So I work with both e-learning agencies such as Sponge, Mind Tools, and Omniplex. I also work with in-house learning and development teams as well for a number of international companies such as Philip Morris International and Ralph Lauren. Outside of the work I do at Comtech, I have continued to develop the interest that I have in learning and development. I'm currently a director on the board of the Learning Network. For anybody not familiar with that, it is a UK-based community interest company aimed at creating a community for anybody who works in learning and development, whether you're a freelancer, you're just getting started in the industry, or you've been working in the industry for a number of years. And when it comes to languages, I studied French, Spanish, and Portuguese at university. But you'll all be pleased to know that we won't be putting that to the test today. This webinar will just be delivered in English. So on to the good stuff. Hopefully, while you're all here, what we will be covering in today's session. So first of all, we will be looking at content categorization. What is it, and why you should be doing it? How to build an effective translation strategy, how AI is changing the game, how it's making a significant impact in the world of e-learning translation, the three different approaches that we recommend when it comes to AI localization, which is MT, MTPE, and MTAP, and I will be solving the mystery of what those acronyms stand for a little bit later on, where the human touch is really essential and where we feel it makes a real difference and adds value, and finally some takeaways from today's session before we then open it up to a Q&A. So hopefully this is what you've all signed up for. If anybody does have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and we can address them at the end of today's session. So let's get started. First of all, a little bit of myth busting for you. So a common objection that we receive in the translation industry is, well, everybody speaks English. Why do I need to translate my learning content? But it's actually a growing trend, I think, to have a culturally and linguistically diverse workforce. On average, 68% of UK-based employees have colleagues from different countries within their immediate workspace. And actually, yes, a lot of people have a command of English, but this is not necessarily true for kind of people who are based on the shop floor or factory floor, for example. But even when it comes to kind of work, white collar workers, there's still very much a benefit to delivering training in the native language. So you can see at the bottom of the screen, there's kind of the industries where there's the greatest kind of diversity in the workplace. But for everybody, we kind of recommend that you do localize your learning content into native languages. 90% of learners prefer receiving learning content in their native language. And this is probably because it just reduces that friction with engaging with the content. People are able to engage a lot easier and a lot quicker if this content is delivered in their native language. And it's probably for this reason that we see nearly 20% better knowledge retention when this is the case. So what does this mean for your translation strategy? I'm sure that everybody in this virtual room today is kind of seeing the same challenges when it comes to budget. We are all being asked to do a lot more with what is feeling like less and less every year. And as much as we would love to give all content the 5-star treatment, this is often just not the case. And we're not able to do that when it comes to budget. So before you start translating any content, it's really important to think about what content is most valuable to you. Obviously, the idea of value can differ from company to company. So it's helpful to have a few questions to help you decide what that really means for you. So think about the audience of your content. It could be what content has the biggest audience, what content has the most impactful audience for you. Also, think about, is this content contributing to business objectives or brand values? Is it part of an overall company strategy, for example? And also think about what happens if it goes right and what happens if it's done badly. What are the risks kind of involved here, and how should that inform the approach that you take to translation? And you can use these questions to help prioritize your content and then match the service level or the approach that you take, and really help you get the most out of the budget that you do have available for translation, but also things like the time and the resources that you have internally as well, because we know that those are increasingly limited as well. So if we look at as an example here of this fictional client, what this client has done is they have split their content into three different categories. They've got at the very top there anything that's kind of very creative or very sensitive or perhaps aligned to business objectives. So for this example, they have chosen their DE&I content as being particularly high priority for them. You then move into that middle range, which is content that is, it's still important, it still needs kind of the reassurance of a second pair of eyes, but it's not as high priority. And then at the bottom there, you've got content which is a nice to have. They would still like to have it available in multiple different languages, but it is of lower impact, it's of lower priority for them. And then they've been able to match the service level to each of the different content types. So for that high priority content, they are leading with a fully human translation. That is a translation from scratch using professional native speaking linguists with no AI or automation involved. They want full assurance that everything has been done exactly right, and to a high level of polish and finish as well. We then look at the middle range content, and they've opted for a human post editing approach where they have used AI, but they've assigned human linguists to go in, review, and refine the output as well. And then finally, that bottom tier content, then they've used a fully automated solution. So this has enabled them to have content available in lots of different languages where they wouldn't have been able to do it previously. And because it is quite low risk content, it's quite straightforward. They are happy that that automated solution is good enough for that particular content. What I will do now is I will just walk through a little bit more those approaches that I mentioned. I recognize that there's a few different acronyms flying around there. So I'll walk you through what each of those approaches mean and how you can decide which approach is best for your content. So the three that I'm going to walk us through right now are raw MT, so raw machine translation, machine translation with automated post editing, and then machine translation with human post editing. And you can see as we walk through that table, the level of human input increases. And as a result, the risks that are involved, the confidence that you can have kind of correspond to that level of human input. If I do just a very quick deep dive into each of all of these, first of all, we'll look at raw machine translation. So what does this mean? This is effectively an out-of-the-box AI translation from solutions such as DeepL or some of the tools that are available that tie into authoring tools like Text Localisation, for example. This has little to no customization or human input involved there. You may be able to offer a formality toggle to determine whether you have informal or formal, for example, for those languages where it makes a difference. You may also have a limited glossary function, but that's really the extent of what you're able to do in terms of being able to control the output of the AI translation. For this reason, we consider it quite risky to use on its own without any human editing or additional kind of involvement there. And this is because it will generally produce quite literal or awkward translations. It tends to look at it on a sentence by sentence or even sometimes word by word basis. So it doesn't necessarily sound like a a natural, native, fluent translation. I mentioned already you don't necessarily have that much control over your brand tone of voice. It's quite generic. You're not able to tailor it to how you might say certain things, including the terminology. And sometimes it can often struggle with context as well. So if you're looking at kind of very short strings like button text, for example, it may struggle there. And the errors that this could produce can obviously have negative ramifications, such as an impact on learner engagement, and it could impact your reputation as well. For this reason, we recommend that it's used more for internal only content, things that are used for kind of information or reference purposes only, or anything that's sort of lower risk or where speed is the priority over quality. Sometimes you might need to get content out really, really quickly. You can always then go back and update it with reviewed or proofread content later on. But it's very much kind of reserved for those use cases only. We don't tend to recommend it for anything that's particularly strategic for learners, or anything where that customer or brand voice is really prominent, or anything that's particularly culturally sensitive. So the bottom line is the raw machine translation solution. It's fast, it's cheap, but there are a lot of better alternatives out there, like the ones that I'm going to come on to in just a second, which do give you better control over quality, consistency, and general accuracy as well. So the first of those options that I'm going to come on to is machine translation automated post editing. It's obviously quite a mouthful, so we do call it MTAP internally at Comtech. It's a lot snappier to refer to. And what MTAP does is it actually blends three different types of translation technology. So for anybody who's not familiar with translation technology, one of the more common sort of things that is used in the translation industry is translation memory software. What this does is it stores anything that we translate for a client within their own unique memory. It means then that we can refer back to this for previous projects where there might be overlapping content. It also obviously provides a great frame of reference for things like terminology, tone of voice, formality level, and that kind of thing. So the first port of call for an MTAP solution is to actually refer back to those translation memories, see what there is for us to be able to reuse. Then if there's any gaps, it leverages machine translation from the previous solution. But then it passes it through a large language model to complete what we call automated post editing. So this is post editing that is completed by AI according to a set of predefined rules that we have configured during setup. So we might tell it to consult with a glossary of terms, for example. We might set it up with a particular persona. For example, you are a professional translator. You are tasked with delivering friendly but professional translations, and we want you to make changes such as this, this, and this. We're able to be quite granular with the changes that we ask it to make, such as non-translatable, so content that should be left in English, for example, such as job titles. That's quite a common one. Or we might even ask it to be quite specific with the way that it handles certain punctuation, like bullet points, for example. There are some languages that prefer to use them, others that don't. Because we have that level of control, we're able to customize it to quite a minute detail. And that is a real benefit of MTAP versus a raw machine translation solution. We have a lot of control over what the output looks like. And it's also very fast and affordable as well. So compared to a human only or a human from scratch solution, MTAP is typically 2 to 4 times faster. It can be completed in as little as a couple of minutes, depending on how complex the file format is. And it's also typically about 70% cheaper than human translation as well. So it's a great solution if you're up against it in terms of budget and deadline. You do also have the flexibility to submit for a more complex module, for example, that you might want a pair of human eyes to look at. You have that ability to kind of upgrade at any time. So with all of that in mind, we typically recommend MTAP for anything that's kind of basic learning content, anything that's quite technical or compliance based. Because of that glossary function, we're able to do well when it comes to content that's quite high in terminology, or also if you have large volumes of content such as libraries of off-the-shelf content, it's able to localize this content at a quite speedy and cost-effective rate for you as well. Like all machine translation solutions, we don't tend to recommend it for anything that's particularly complex or creative. AI has come a long way in a very short amount of time, but it still struggles a little bit with anything that's particularly creative or particularly brand led as well. And the same kind of goes for different language combinations as well. Typically, right now, AI isn't necessarily a great fit for complex language combinations like Arabic, Hebrew, and Thai, for example. It will also struggle with some European languages as well, such as Hungarian and Finnish. If anybody is interested in a full list of languages and the kind of approach that we would recommend for those language combinations, just drop me a note at the end and I'd be happy to share that with you as well. So the bottom line for NTAP is it is a great solution when you have lots of content, but obviously you still have additional options if you're looking for a greater level of human input. And that leads us quite nicely then onto the third option, which is machine translation with human post editing, which is very much a hybrid approach. We've generated the machine translation and gone through automated post editing as in option 2, but now we're assigning a human linguist to really review the output, make any changes that might be needed for fluency, and also looking at things like style, tone, and terminology as well. So obviously this human involvement provides a greater level of reassurance or confidence in the quality of the output. It gives us that really kind of that high level of control over things like style and fluency, which were much more subjective. And it's still a faster and cheaper solution than human only translation. So it's typically sort of 1.5 to 2 times faster than human translation from scratch. And you're typically looking at about a 40% price reduction versus human translation from scratch. For this reason, it's still a really strong solution for anything that's kind of learner facing or customer facing, anything that's particularly sensitive in nature, or anything where you're looking to deliver a real kind of strong emotional impact in the content. This is the approach that we would recommend for that. So this is an approach that combines the speed of AI with the quality of human input. So for that reason, it's a really strong compromise between AI and human. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of sales pitches that disguise themselves as webinars. So I promise you this will be the only slide where I talk about Pronto. But anybody who's not familiar with Pronto, this is Comtech's self-service machine translation platform, and is one of the ways that you can access MTAP and MTPE technology. And the reason I'm talking about it today is I'm incredibly proud of this tool that we've built because of the problems that I think it can solve that we're seeing a lot from our clients who are in the L&D industry. So first of all, you can instantly translate learning content into over 20 languages. Like I said previously, this can be done in just a matter of minutes for a lot of kind of different file formats, anything from export files in from authoring tools, for example, to slide decks, to subtitle files. You've got the complete flexibility there. You also have flexibility in the number of users that you're able to assign to the platform as well. And you also have the ability to choose which level of post editing you want, whether that's auto edit, which is the MTAP solution I mentioned in option 2, or the human edit, the pro edit solution, which is the post editing that I mentioned in option 3. You also have complete training and setup support from Comtech, and it's very easy to keep on top of your translation costs as well with a monthly subscription. Moving on then to best practice. From all of the conferences and the exhibitions that I've attended over the last few years, I feel like the AI bubble has burst a little bit. I think we're all a lot more aware now of the current limitations that exist when it comes to AI technology, and there's still very much the need for us to lean on the expertise, especially of our human linguists. So I just wanted to kind of cover some of the ways in which we are still leaning on that human expertise at Comtech. First of all, we are building glossaries with our human linguists to be able to train these large language models. We are using them and their expertise to review those style guide instructions that we're using to prime the LLMs and making sure that they are culturally relevant for the target market. We are testing and evaluating these outputs from the AI engines, making sure that they are actually delivering on what we need them to within a certain service level. We are still advising on the best service level for different content types. We always kind of think of ourselves as a partner for our clients. So if there is a particular service level that we would recommend for certain content types, we're still very much happy to make that recommendation. Um, I also just want to sort of stop here and mention the importance of samples. I think especially if you're exploring a different kind of service level, or perhaps you're brand new to localization, samples can be really helpful to understand exactly what you're getting at each point, each stage, and each service level. It provides really kind of clear transparency on what you can expect from these different approaches to AI localization. So I'd very much recommend that you kind of do a bit of trial and error to see which approach will fit you best. And obviously, samples is a really good way to do that. And finally, I'm sure everybody is aware of just how quickly the AI world is evolving. It seems to change minute by minute at the moment. So it's really important to us to kind of develop that human expertise at Comtech, to stay on top of how the industry is changing and developing, to make sure that we're developing our expertise and we're also continuing to deliver value to our clients, not only in the recommendations that we make, but in our own knowledge of how this can be applied to live projects and clients as well. So finally, a few takeaways from today's session, just to recap some of the things that we've walked through this morning. First of all, content categorization is the best place to start, especially when you're building a translation strategy. Hopefully I've given you some helpful tips to kind of get started on that content categorization step. Not all content serves the same purpose. Not all of it has been created equally. So it's actually recommended that your translation strategy involves a different mix of approaches, whether that's fully human right then through to fully automated, depending on what the objective or the aim of that content is. The three approaches that I mentioned, so MT, MTAP, and MTPE, they all have very specific use cases. There are examples of where they all work really strongly, but there are also some where they're just not appropriate, and times where they wouldn't be recommended. So just make sure that you're really confident in the approach that you're going to take to your content, and obviously reach out to support where you need that. AI is only as good as the people behind it. So, with that in mind, make sure that you take the time to set up that AI well, whether that's something that you're doing internally or working with a translation partner. It's worth the time and effort to make sure that it's set up for success so that you can have confidence in the output and what it is delivering later down the line. And always leave time for samples and testing to make sure that you are fully confident and you're fully aligned on expectations in terms of what you can see from those outputs as well. And finally, work with a partner who gets it, not just sells it. There's a lot of options out there when it comes to localization. It can be quite a tricky world to navigate, but if you're working with a partner who's able to kind of make those proactive recommendations, I really sort of recommend that you lean on them to help you kind of find the best fit for you. And finally, a little special offer for anybody who has joined us this morning or is watching on a catch-up recording. I have a few freebies to give away for you. So first of all, we do have a guide for AI in e-learning localization, which I'm happy to kind of share following the session today. Also, we have a free 1 month trial of Pronto, who's for anybody who wants to give it a go and see for themselves how it works. It's worth £375, so it's definitely worth giving a go. And that's available in all of the 20 languages that is available right now. So all you have to do is drop me an email. My email's on the screen for you there, and I'd be happy to send both of those across to you today. And also, please feel free to pass on to anybody who wasn't able to make it today. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions they may have about the content as well. I'll leave that on screen for just a few seconds before I open it up to questions. So I'll pause here now and see if there's anybody who has anything they'd like to ask from today's session. If you do have a question, just feel free to pop it in the chat and I can ask. Just give it a few more minutes. . Georgia, I've asked for a list of languages. I can absolutely do that for you. And also anybody else who is interested in a recording of today's session, that will be emailed across to you later on this week. So you've got plenty of opportunity to catch up. That's great. Any more questions before we wrap up today? We've got one here. So Natalie has asked if translation covers captions on videos. Natalie, we do actually have a separate webinar coming up in the next few weeks, which covers media translation, so voiceover and subtitles and that kind of thing. But yes, to summarize very quickly, AI can be used to translate video content as well. Typically, that's either in a subtitle file or in a transcript, and both of those work very well. The only kind of thing to bear in mind there is if you're working with synced videos, if you've got kind of time restraints when it comes to translating video content and it needs to be synchronized with what's happening on screen, is potentially we would recommend a human input there, just to make sure that you're not kind of overrunning timings or you're not trying to cram too much on the screen when it comes to subtitling, which could have then a negative impact on learner experience and being able to read it within a certain time frame. So that would be my recommendation there, but obviously sign up to the second part and we can cover that in a lot more detail. I also got another question here about how long it takes to build translation memories and a tone, voice, or brand for a customer. I will answer that second part first, actually. Typically, that stage of creating a style guide or a brand voice for a customer, we do that kind of on onboarding stage for Pronto, and that typically takes about 2 weeks. But the more information that you can kind of provide up front is a really big help to doing that. So typically we ask for as much reference material as possible. If you have English brand guidelines, if you've got tone of voice documents, anything that kind of informs your English tone of voice is really, really helpful. We then also have a table form that we ask people to fill out for any kind of specifics that you know about the target market. If you're looking to kind of deliver like a friendly, casual approach or something potentially more professional and reserved, we kind of use that to build the voice as well. And then we tend to reach out to our linguists and just check that that's culturally relevant in the target market. So you might see a difference, for example, in the way that a German company might speak to customers versus Latin America. For example, there's a difference in approach there in terms of kind of formality and friendliness, and also kind of the way that a brand will express itself in those markets as well. There's also the question as to how consistent you want to be. Do you want a uniform tone of voice across all markets, or are you happy to kind of flex that? So that's something that we can kind of work with you to do, and liaise with you in terms of what you're looking for from that respect. In terms of building up translation memories, this depends on the volume of content that you're translating. Obviously, the more content that you translate, the faster that memory builds up, but that memory is in place from the very first project that we work with you on. So that even if it's just a couple of lines, that will go straight into your translation memory and be used for future reference. So obviously, the more content that's in that memory, the better, but it's there from the very first project. Hopefully that answers those questions. Any final questions before we wrap up for today? Obviously, if there's any more that come in after today's session, you have my contact details on the screen for you there. Natalie had just asked about the onboarding process. I assume that's kind of in regards to Pronto, but also just more generally. I would say that it obviously depends on the kind of content that you're working with, but typically we recommend a kind of a thorough onboarding call to make sure that we can brief our linguists in fully to what your expectations are from the translations, what you're really looking for in terms of the approach so that we can advise on the best service level. There's also a stage there in collating as much reference material as possible, as I mentioned just now, to give us a really full picture of what you're kind of looking for. We can also then talk about things like target languages, on different content types to make sure that we have a process or a workflow in place. And that can be flexed depending on the different content types and approaches that might be needed. Perhaps I'll just follow up with you after the call, Natalie, and see if there's any other specific questions about the onboarding process that you'd like to hear more of. And just to answer that last question about whether we work just with L&D or other teams, Comtech is a full service agency. So we have a global network of linguists and they are based all over the world and they work in a variety of different subject areas as well. So we're able then to handpick our linguists based on the content that we work with. And obviously, if we're working with AI solutions, then we're able to kind of tweak that accordingly to the type of content or the end use of the content that we're working with as well. So it means that we can kind of really hit all different departments within a company, all different kind of file types. So we've got that flexibility there. Alina has asked if AI is reliable for complicated medical texts. I would say, Alina, to kind of go back to those initial questions that we asked at the start. So think about kind of what the risks are involved there. And also how kind of when you say about if it's complicated, how terminology heavy it is. Typically, I would say for kind of medical texts, you want some level of human involvement there, especially because the impacts of getting it wrong are a lot higher. So I would recommend at least kind of machine translation post editing there so that you can check not only the accuracy of your translations, but also when it comes to terminology and that kind of thing, making sure that that's all correct before it goes out into the world. That would be my recommendation for medical. Madeline's just asking about the webinar. Yes, this will be made available to everybody. You'll get an email in the next few days once the webinar recording has been processed, and it will be shared with you directly. So no worries about that. Brilliant. I think that could be it for questions today. Thank you so much to everybody who submitted those questions. They were great. And obviously, if anybody's got any more after today, my contact details are there for you. I hope that you found this useful. I hope that you enjoy the recording if you're watching it back. And yeah, sign up for part 2 where we will look at video and media localization, especially with regards to AI. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining, and I hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you so much. Bye.